please. Thank you.
Just to confirm, Chair, we are now live.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to this Erewash Borough Council Licensing and Public Protection Committee meeting on the 11th of February. Welcome to all the councillors and officers and any members of the public that may well be watching. We'll start off with the agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies? Councillor Dawson.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I've got apologies from Councillor Glenys Birking and I'm acting as substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Thank you. Welcome. Agenda item number 2, any declarations of interest? I'd take that as a no. Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, the minutes of our last meeting held on 15th of October 2020.
Councillor Miller.
Welcome, Councillor Miller. Thank you. Councillor Miller, we're on agenda item number 3, which is the minutes of our last meeting.
Yeah, move it.
The 15th of October. I wasn't present, but could I have somebody to move the minutes, please?
Move it.
Thank you. Seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. I'll take it that that's been approved. Thank you. Just one comment on there. Although Councillor Hopkinson did substitute for myself, but my apologies are not recorded in the apologies for absence. If officers wish to put that in there, if they could please amend that. And with that, again, can I ask that we approve these minutes? And this is by exception. If you got any comments, then put them in the chat bar. Otherwise, I'll take it that the minutes have been approved. Thank you, Mrs. Corfield. I've got your comments there that Councillor Ashley is subbing for Councillor Wilson. Thank you for that. Thank you. Moving on now to agenda item number 4, the licensing activity report. Can I hand over to Mr. Thurston, please?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to just run through a few of the headlines in the activity report, which covers the period from the 1st of July 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. I think the first point I'd like to draw members' attention to is on page 9 of the report pack, which indicates a shift in the work that the licensing team were doing during the COVID crisis. And as you'll see from the Licensing and Gambling Act compliance checks, there were a number of visits that were carried out with police officers and environmental health officers by the licensing team, specifically in relation to COVID security and compliance measures, which, as we came out of the first lockdown in May, June, July time in 2020, clearly there were a number of issues that were arising, particularly in the hospitality trade. And of course, our licensing team were very directly involved in dealing with a lot of those issues, along with the environmental health officers and of course our colleagues in the police. And as you can see from what's in the report, 11 visits were undertaken during the reporting period to check on various things from COVID compliance, security measures, and also issues around internal arrangements in businesses to ensure that they were COVID secure, and also to assist in checking risk assessments that were put in place by businesses, and also checking on track and trace and other issues that were very important as we came out of the first lockdown. And I think that's a trend really that's reflected across a number of services within the environment and community services portfolio. but I think it's just indicative of the fact that COVID has had quite a significant impact on the work of the licensing team, particularly in the second half of last year. It's also, I think, worth noting that throughout the COVID crisis, the licensing team has maintained an enforcement presence throughout the pandemic. And as you'll see on page 10 of the activity report, the team was involved in some multi-agency activity with colleagues from the police and the county council to check on road traffic and vehicle safety. And I think it's noteworthy to mention that an event that took place on the 5th of August at West Park, where upwards of 40 odd vehicles were actually pulled over for inspection. 3 of Erewash's taxis were pulled over during that activity, and those 3 taxis were found to be fully compliant with all traffic requirements, which I think was very pleasing from the team's point of view and from the council's point of view. Moving on to Erewash taxi compliance issues, again, the theme of services being continued as normal as they could be during the pandemic, and clearly the vehicle inspections for taxis continued throughout the pandemic. With over 287 Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles being inspected during the latter part of last year, and 11 cases where serious defects were picked up by our mechanics and vehicle plates were removed and infringement notices issued to drivers and operators. We also saw during the period the chairman using his delegated powers to authorise immediate revocations of driver licences, and there are 3 cases that are listed in the activity report, which had to be considered by the chairman in liaison with the Director of Community Services, and the powers that are delegated to the chair were used to revoke licences or immediately revoke licences because there was considered to be serious public safety issues if those drivers were allowed to continue to drive. And as you'll see from the narrative there, some very serious issues were considered, and quite rightly those licences were revoked. And again, continuing with the COVID theme, at the bottom of page 11, the licensing team were involved in helping administer a couple of the grants that have been issued by the government to support businesses during the COVID crisis, and the licensing team were involved in supporting colleagues in other sectors of the council to ensure those grants were administered and allocated very quickly and swiftly to the businesses that needed them. On to page 12 of the report, and I think one of the most important thing I'd like to draw members' attention to is the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, which is a new set of standards that were issued by the Secretary of State for Transport last year, which have very significant implications for the way in which all local authorities, as licensing authorities, administer their taxi and private hire standards and policies. The new standards have been issued very much on the basis of emphasising the importance of safeguarding issues and protecting children from harm and vulnerable individuals over the age of 18 from harm, who may have to use taxis during the course of their lives, and clearly this is reflecting some of the issues that have been well documented in recent years that have been linked to the taxi trade, which are now contained within the statutory guidance that's been issued. What officers are now having to do is to review all the council's licensing policies that relate to taxis and private hire vehicles, as we are under an obligation and duty to certainly take account of what's in the statutory in the statutory guidance and statutory standards, and make sure that our policies reflect what's in those standards. So officers are currently going through all the areas and all the issues that are covered by the standards to ensure that we're either fully compliant as we are at the moment, or whether we might need to change our policies and to adopt some of the issues that are raised in the new standards. Clearly, this will require members' consideration, and the intention is that a report will be presented to the next meeting, identifying if there are any changes that are needed to council's policies, and also talking about where we haven't felt that we've needed to change our policies, because in the spirit of transparency, we're expected to show and demonstrate, why we haven't made any changes if they're specified in the standards. And I would say at this stage that there are a number of areas that are covered by the new standards that we are already compliant with, and we've already made a number of steps historically to ensure that we are certainly mindful of safeguarding issues, and members will be well aware of the policies and the issues that have been discussed in recent years that have had a safeguarding theme to them. So in a lot of areas we are fully compliant, but there may be areas that members may think that we need to change our policies, but that will obviously be discussed and considered in the report that's presented to the next meeting. That's all I've got to say, Chair, on the activity report. Happy to take any queries, questions from the committee.
Mr. Thurston, thank you very much for that report. And I have Councillor Howard Griffiths who wishes to ask a question or make a comment. Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, on the final comments that Mr. Thurston made, I'd be interested to see what changes are proposed. And I think we, most of us are aware of the incidents that led to this review. And I do think licensing authorities do have a role in preventing danger to vulnerable adults and children. But I do think social services and other agencies, including charities and the police, also have a burden of, let's put it this way, to be careful. There were some failures in the institutions that led to the incident that brought about this review. And hopefully, although we can play a part, we need to work with these other agencies and taxi drivers as well to try and tighten up so these sort of incidents don't happen again. Because in the trade, one would have thought rumours would get round about people with displaying, let's put it, suspicious tendencies. So they've got a role, taxi drivers have got a role, I think, in actually picking up those sort of rumours and taking relevant action to try and prevent things happening rather than detect them when they have happened. So I welcome the review, and I'll move that we accept the officer's report.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Mr. Thurston, do you wish to make a comment?
Other than just to fully support the comments that Councillor Griffiths has made, I think the whole issue of safeguarding is really every agency's responsibility. It's not just the county council who have the primary role, obviously, in safeguarding, but as a district council, Erewash have a role to play, and it is a partnership approach. We do rely on the trade to be compliant and to be aware of the issues around and safeguarding. We have in the past consulted quite widely with colleagues in the county council and the police over issues that have safeguarding implications for the taxi trade, and I think that needs to continue. And certainly when we do look to consult on the new standards, then clearly those agencies, those multi-agencies, will be asked to consider and comment on any changes that we're proposing to make to our policies.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston. I have Councillor Mee who wishes to ask a question. Councillor Mee.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a nice, clear report. I've just got a quick question on the fast-tracked pavement licences. Is it possible to give us the general locations of the 4 pavement licences that were granted? I mean, I assume that they were in Long Eaton and Ilkeston, but I don't actually know. And are we aware of any causes for concern at any of those 4 premises after the licences were granted?
I don't have details of precisely where those businesses are that were granted licences. There is there are a number of checks and balances that are considered when a pavement licence request is received by the council, and we have to consult with police and with the county council. And again, I'm not aware that we've had any issues at all with those businesses that have been issued pavement licences. Clearly, the intention is that any potential issues are obviously considered during the application phase of the process. So it's the intention that when a licence is granted, that we are expecting there to be no issues in terms of any local disturbances, any nuisance, or even obstruction to pedestrians and other users in those areas. So, but I can arrange for the premises that have been granted the licence, those businesses to be forwarded to you, Councillor Mee, if that would be of any help to you.
Yes, please. That would be good. It really is more on the obstruction side of things. I was interested to know if, because I remember some of the discussions when these were first being brought in, and I suspect that there won't be many issues. I was just interested to know if there had been any, but thank you for that response.
Thank you, Councillor Mee, and thank you, Mr. Thurston. I have Councillor Briggs, who wishes to ask a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. The revocation, where under the delegated authority, the chair of licensing in collaboration with the lead member for community services, would you just remind me what document provides for that delegation? And secondly, the COVID grants. I mean, obviously, it's been a really terrible time for business. We've given out lots of grant money. I'm just interested to learn what kind of due diligence the team were employing in the settling of those grants, just to make sure that we are happy that they were all paid out appropriately. Thank you.
Chair, to answer the first part of Councillor Biggs' question, the delegation that permits the chairman of this committee in liaison with the director of community services, that's contained in the council's constitution and scheme of delegations. In relation to the grants and the due diligence checks, what I would say is that the licensing team were involved in providing information about businesses that may be affected. The actual administration of the allocation of the grants is dealt with by colleagues operating through the finance departments and revenues and benefits. So I'm not able to actually provide any detail regarding the due diligence checks that would be carried out. But really, with a lot of the grants that have been issued under the emergency provisions due to COVID, I think there is a big presumption that those businesses that are requesting the grants are entitled to them, although I am aware clearly that that's an opportunity for some people to manipulate the system to their own advantage. But I can certainly find out and circulate to members what due diligence checks are actually carried out in relation to grants that are issued under the COVID crisis and the COVID grants, if that would help, Jem.
Yes, I think that would. Councillor Briggs, are you happy with that?
Yeah, thank you. I think all members would be interested on the due diligence. We like to think that nobody would ever consciously defraud the council, but equally we'd like to be sure that the grants that we have paid out have been paid out appropriately and there has been no abuse of the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Ms. Thurston, I have a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, I'm sure I said something for the whole of the committee. Before I speak, Councillor Parkinson, would you like to say something?
It's really just a follow-up to Councillor Briggs' question there, because you may recall that I think it was at a council meeting we had a question asked about the comparison of the time taken by this council compared to other authorities in issuing these various grants. I think the point was then made that we take that responsibility very carefully to make sure there's no fraud and so forth, and therefore there is due diligence involved. But I'm really just saying that, and I think the matter has been raised before at council itself, and we did have an answer at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. As I was saying, I say this on behalf of the committee. I'm sure that a lot of good work has been done by our licensing committee, but just a couple of questions, if I may. The report that we have here, how does it compare with normal times? In other words, non-COVID times. Has the workload increased, changed? What's actually happened with our licensing team? How have we operated during the COVID pandemic, please?
I think the biggest change that we've seen within the licensing team really has been on a couple of fronts. Really, first, its ability to maintain a presence particularly in the hospitality sector, where a lot of those businesses have been closed or they've been restricted in terms of their opening. But also, in as I mentioned in my report, when we came out of lockdown, there was clearly an awful lot of queries and concerns being expressed from businesses about what they needed to do in terms of COVID security, but then also concerns about whether businesses were actually operating in accordance with the guidance and the regulations that have been issued, particularly around COVID security. And one of the biggest impacts really has been that increase in the way in which the team have had to respond to those concerns and those queries. It's not been solely the licensing team that's been involved in that. As I mentioned, environmental health and the police are also involved. But it certainly is a shift away from what would be the normal work that the team is actually doing, and also the way in which the team has been has had to deal with the taxi trade, for example, because clearly with social distancing and the need to ensure our own COVID security for our own members of staff, that has limited to an extent the contact that we've been able to have with the taxi trade. I'm not saying that officers haven't still been meeting with the representatives and drivers and operatives from the taxi trade. They have been doing, but clearly we've had to put in different measures and different controls to ensure the safety of our own staff, as you would expect, and follow the national guidance that's been issued by government. But I think the message has been that once we've come out of lockdown, and this applies to a number of the council services, the message really has been that we've tried to resume, as far as we reasonably can, a business as normal approach. We've tried to maintain, as I mentioned in the report, a presence within the sector, an enforcement presence. But of course, inevitably, the way that we've had to do things as a service and the way officers have had to deliver services has changed. It's not been the same under the COVID pandemic situation, and we've had to adapt the way in which we deliver services. But we've tried to maintain that presence, be accessible and be available, but just through different channels.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston. And also I see Mrs. Singleton has posted some information in the chat bar. She says, good morning, I can confirm that payment licenses have been granted to one town centre public house in Ilkeston, a public house in Draycott, and a public house and a cafe in Long Eaton. We've had one COVID-19 compliance issue at the premise in Ilkeston. No issues, complaints regarding obstruction, etc. I'm sure you can read that in there, councillors. Thank you for that, Mrs. Singleton. The other couple of questions which I have is, on page 8, back in October, the drivers panel revoked a license of a licensed driver, and I understand that was perhaps the same driver who was involved in this 6-vehicle accident, which is mentioned on page 11 on 30th of November. Do we have any update on that, please? That perhaps Mrs. Singleton can answer that, or Mr. Thurston, whichever.
Yes, I'll ask Caroline to answer that, Chairman. She'll probably be closer to that one than I am.
Of course, thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Nick. Yes, I can confirm that the driver has put an appeal to Magistrates Court. Danielle may be able to update a bit further on that, because I know she's had recent contact with the solicitor, because obviously the solicitor was unaware of the immediate revocation because of the accident in Derby City. I'm not quite sure if Danielle's had an update from the solicitor about contact with the driver as yet. I hope that helps.
Is Mrs. Hughes with us here today?
Hi, yes, I'm here. So the case is listed for a date in April, but that's in relation to the panel appeal and not for the immediate revocation. His solicitor is currently taking further instructions, and I'm waiting for a response from him.
Thank you very much. And my final question is, although this committee's function is we look at the safety and well-being of the drivers, sorry, the passengers, etc., and people who frequent our licensed premises, but also I note on page 11 and other issues that there was aggressive behaviour by a driver towards our staff at Merlin Way, which apparently we gave a warning letter to. Now, what's our stance on that? I mean, I wouldn't tolerate aggressive behaviour towards anybody, either our staff or any members of the public. Could you give us an update on that, please, as to what exactly should we be doing to protect our staff, just apart from doing a warning letter? Is there anything else in place for that?
We do take the safety of our staff very seriously, obviously, and certainly you can imagine that there are occasions where the decisions that the mechanics are making, staff at Merlin Way Depot are making, which the drivers are not happy about. The majority of drivers, they may not be happy with the decision, but they're not aggressive towards our staff. I think the council does have procedures in place to ensure that the safety of staff, either when they're working alone or when they're actually on the premises. And on this occasion, clearly the driver was unhappy with the decision that had been made and expressed that aggression towards the mechanic and towards staff at Merlin. And quite rightly, he was issued with a warning. But clearly, if that escalates any further, I mean, there was no physical violence; it was verbal, a verbal aggression that was shown towards the member of staff concerned. But even so, it's not necessary; it's unacceptable, and the council won't tolerate it. Which is why I think we take the position that we do, that we have to draw the line in the sand and tell drivers that it's not acceptable and that we're not going to tolerate it. And we would consider escalating the issue if we needed to, in the event that a driver continued, or the same driver continued to show aggression on separate occasions. We would take further action, and we would consider what we needed to do to ensure that driver was aware that his actions and behaviour was unacceptable. But yeah, we do take a very, very firm stance that staff are doing a very difficult job, and it's accepted that the trade are facing very difficult times at the moment, but there is no need for aggression when the mechanics are actually identifying hazards on a vehicle that they think are dangerous, and I think it would be very rash of us not to be raising those issues with drivers. That's our duty, that's what we're here to do. So and really, the drivers shouldn't be presenting vehicles that have got defects on. I mean, that's the flip side of the coin. So to be then aggressive because we've discovered defects on a vehicle really is I think the drivers need to take a hard, long look at themselves and not be presenting vehicles which are not roadworthy. But yes, we will continue to take a very tough stance on these sorts of issues, and it won't be tolerated, Councillor Athwell.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston. I'm sure all the committee members will agree with you on that. But also I would like to say at this stage that I'm sure all the committee again agrees. We know you're working under very difficult circumstances. Our staff themselves, when they talking to either licensed drivers or visiting licensed premises, etc., it's not easy. And we just wish to thank you for all the work that you do. And as regards your report, it has been moved by Councillor Howard Griffiths, and it has been seconded by Councillor Mrs. Griffiths. So, as I said earlier, by exception, can we move to note this report, please? Thank you, councillors. Officer Thurston, your report is noted. Thank you. And
Thank you, Chair.
thank you. I believe that concludes the meeting of this licensing and Public Protection Committee meeting for today. Thank you very much to officers and members for your participation. Could we take this meeting off live, please, now? And thank you for all the members, sorry, the public who have been watching as well. Thank you.